My fiancée and her entire family pressured me to give them my money. I secretly learned their language, recorded a conversation, and exposed a criminal mafia that had already scammed 3 other men before me. I'm 28 years old. I work in tech, and what I'm about to tell you sounds so absurd that there are still days when I have trouble believing it. About 2 years ago, I almost married someone who, along with her entire family, was planning to steal every last cent I had. And when I say planning, I'm not talking about a girl who was interested in my money. I mean, that would have been bad but understandable. I'm talking about an organized criminal operation, like with previous victims and everything. But let me start from the beginning, because this story is long and complicated. I met Tatiana in 2019 at a networking event for the company where I work. She was 24 at the time. I was 26. And honestly, she seemed incredible from the first second. She was smart, funny, spoke perfect English, although she had an accent I loved, and she seemed genuinely interested in me, not just in my job or my money. She was from Eastern Europe. I think she mentioned her family had emigrated when she was a teenager. We started dating and everything was good. You know, like any normal relationship at the beginning. We'd go out to dinner, go to the movies. I met some of her friends. She met mine. Nothing weird. The thing is that Tatiana lived with her parents, which at the time didn't seem strange to me because, well, many people from immigrant families live with their parents until they get married. It's normal in many cultures. She worked in administration at a small office and made a decent but not spectacular salary. I worked as a software developer and honestly, I was doing pretty well financially. I had saved up good money and had my own apartment in a decent area of the city. After like a year and a half together, I proposed to her. She said yes. We cried. It was all very emotional and beautiful, and we started planning the wedding. This is where things start to get weird, although I didn't see it at the time because, I guess, I was in love and trusted her completely. Tatiana suggested that we move in with her parents temporarily to save money for the wedding and for a bigger house afterwards. I had my apartment, but she said we could rent it out and use that extra money, that her family had a big house with enough space, that it would only be for a few months until the wedding. Honestly, it seemed a bit strange to me, but not unusual either. Like, I know couples who have lived with in-laws temporarily, so I agreed. I rented out my apartment, put my stuff in storage, except clothes and essentials, and moved into her parents' house. The house was big. That was true. It was in an older but decent neighborhood, and Tatiana explained that her family had bought it years ago. Her mother, Valentina, was a woman about 50 years old, very dominant, and always getting involved in everything. Her father, Nikolai, was quieter, worked in construction or something like that. I never really understood. There also lived Tatiana's younger brother and a cousin who was supposedly visiting but had been there for months. They all spoke English with me, but among themselves, they constantly spoke in their native language. And when I entered a room, sometimes they would go quiet or switch to English in a very obvious way. The first few days were uncomfortable, but I thought it was normal. You know, we needed time to get used to living together. But then things started happening that made me nervous. Valentina, Tatiana's mother, started asking very specific questions about my job, my salary, my savings, my financial plans. Not in a casual dinner conversation kind of way, but direct interrogations. How much exactly I earned, how much I had saved, if I had investments, if I had access to loans, if my family had money. And Tatiana didn't stop her. In fact, sometimes she would ask the questions herself. I answered because I thought it was normal for my future in-laws to want to know that I could support their daughter, right? But the intensity was weird. They also started pressuring a lot about legal and financial matters. Valentina insisted that I add Tatiana as a beneficiary on my life insurance, that we open a joint bank account immediately, that I put her name on the title of my apartment. When I said I wanted to wait until after the wedding, she would get super aggressive, like screaming that if I really loved Tatiana, I should trust her completely. That in their culture this was normal before marriage, that I was being selfish and controlling. Tatiana would cry and beg me to do what her mother asked to keep the peace. I felt terrible, like maybe I was being too careful. Maybe this was normal in their culture and I was the weird one. But something in my stomach told me no. that this wasn't right. The situation in the house became increasingly uncomfortable. They spoke in their language all the time, and I could feel they were talking about me. The way they looked at me, the little laughs, the silences when I walked in. Valentina became more aggressive with her demands, basically screaming at me every day about why I hadn't added Tatiana to my bank account yet, why I hadn't given her access to my finances. Tatiana oscillated between crying and comforting me, and then pressuring me too. She would say things like, "My family thinks you don't trust me. They're starting to think you're not a good man. My mother says if you really loved me, you would do this." It was total madness, but I was trapped there, like literally living in their house, sleeping in a room with Tatiana. No privacy, no space to think. That's when I made a decision that basically saved my life. I'm not exaggerating. I decided to learn their language. I know it sounds crazy, but hear me out. There was a coworker, Emma, who happened to speak the same language because her mother was from the same region. One day during lunch, I told her, casually, that my fiancé spoke that language and that I'd like to learn some words as a surprise. She offered to give me basic lessons. I didn't tell her what was really happening. I just said I wanted to surprise my future in-laws by learning their language. We started meeting twice a week after work, and I also used apps on my phone when I was alone in the room. I'm not going to lie. It was hard to learn, and I wasn't progressing super fast. But after like 2 months, I could understand single words and simple phrases, and I started noticing things. When they spoke among themselves and thought I didn't understand, I'd catch words like money, bank, stupid, gringo, account. One night, like 3 months after moving in with them, there was a huge argument between Tatiana and her mother in the kitchen. I was upstairs, and they thought I had my headphones on playing video games like I usually did in the evenings. But instead, I took out my phone and started recording. I recorded like 20 minutes of them yelling at each other in their language. The next day, during my lunch break, I asked Emma if she could help me with something. I told her I had recorded a conversation because I was trying to practice my listening comprehension and wanted to know if she could translate what they were saying. She agreed, thinking it was just a practice exercise. I played the recording and she started listening. I watched her face change, like from neutral to confused to completely horrified. She looked at me and asked, "Where did you get this?" I told her the truth, that it was from my fiancé and her mother. She went completely pale. Emma told me we needed to talk in private, and we went to her car in the parking lot. She asked if I was sitting down, and then she translated the conversation for me. Basically, Valentina was yelling at Tatiana that she was taking too long, that it had already been 4 months, and I still hadn't added Tatiana to my bank accounts, that they needed to speed up the process because they had expenses piling up. Tatiana was responding that she was trying, but that I was more careful than they expected, that I wasn't as easy to manipulate as the previous ones. And that's when my world collapsed. Emma said previous ones. Andrew, she said the previous ones, which means you've done this before. The mother was responding that they needed the money now, that they had debts, that other family members depended on this plan working, that Tatiana needed to be more aggressive, maybe cry more, maybe threaten to break off the engagement to scare me. I sat in that car unable to breathe. Emma asked if I was okay like 5 times. I asked her to translate the entire conversation word for word and write it down. She did. It turned out they had mentioned names, specific amounts of money they expected to get from me, plans about how to get access to my apartment to sell it. They even discussed how long after the wedding they should wait before divorcing to avoid suspicion and secure the most money possible in the divorce settlement. It was a complete operation, like literally a family business. I went back to work that day but couldn't function. I couldn't think. I left early saying I was sick, which was true because I felt like I was going to throw up at any moment. But I didn't go to Tatiana's parents' house. I mean, technically my house at that time. I went to a hotel. I turned off my phone because I knew Tatiana would start calling when she saw I wasn't coming home. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I spent that whole night in that hotel room, sitting on the bed, looking at the translation Emma had written for me, rereading it over and over as if it was going to change if I read it enough times. The next morning I called my parents, Richard and Margaret. They live in another state, but I told them everything over the phone. My father immediately said they would take a flight that same day. I told him it wasn't necessary, but he insisted. My parents arrived that night and we booked rooms at the same hotel. My mother cried when she saw me. My father was furious but trying to stay calm for me. They helped me make a plan. First, we needed to get my stuff back from the house. Second, we needed to go to the police with the evidence I had. Third, I needed to contact a lawyer. The next day, with my parents, I went back to Tatiana's parents' house. Tatiana was hysterical, crying, screaming, where had I been? That she was worried. Why did I turn off my phone? Valentina was also there, looking at me with pure hatred. I told them I was coming for my things, that the wedding was canceled. Tatiana started begging, asking why, what had she done wrong, swearing she loved me. I just said I knew everything, that I had evidence of their plan, and that I was going to the police. Valentina's face changed completely, like from aggressive to calculating in a second. She said I had no evidence of anything, that I was crazy, that if I tried to say anything, she would sue me for defamation. With my parents' help, I packed all my things quickly. Nikolai appeared at some point and started getting aggressive, like blocking the door, but my father called the police and we said they were holding us against our will. When we mentioned the word police, Nikolai stepped aside. We left with all my belongings. As we loaded the car, I could hear Valentina inside yelling at Tatiana in their language, and now that I understood basic words, I could catch that she was blaming her for ruining everything. We went straight to the police station. I showed the recording, Emma's translation, my text messages where Tatiana pressured me about money, emails from Valentina asking about my finances. At first, the officer, George I think his name was, seemed skeptical. Like, this is a civil matter. You should handle it between yourselves. But then he listened to the complete translation, and his expression changed. He asked me many questions about what information exactly I had given them, if I had signed anything, if I had added anyone to my accounts. When I confirmed I hadn't done any of that yet, he said I was very lucky. George explained that this sounded like organized marriage fraud and that they would investigate. He told me they probably couldn't arrest anyone just based on a recorded conversation, but that it was a start. And he suggested I contact immigration too, because if they were doing this systematically, there were probably visa violations involved. The next few days were a total whirlwind. I hired a lawyer, filed official reports. Emma gave a formal statement about the translation. My parents stayed with me the whole week, helping me deal with everything. Tatiana wouldn't stop calling and texting me. At first they were pleas, then anger, then threats, then pleas again. I blocked her on everything. Valentina also tried to contact me from different numbers, sometimes screaming threats, sometimes trying to sound reasonable, saying we'd had a misunderstanding. I documented everything and passed it to my lawyer and the police. The investigation took months, but what they discovered was absolutely sickening. It turns out this family had been doing this for years. They found at least 3 other men who had been victims of the same scheme. One of them lost like $50,000 before he realized. Another was married to a cousin of Tatiana's, and she disappeared after cleaning out his bank accounts. The third was still in legal proceedings, trying to recover his house that he had put in his wife's name, who turned out to be working with the same family. It was a complete operation, like each family member had a role, like Valentina was the one who planned and coordinated everything. Tatiana and other young women in the family were the ones who seduced the victims. Nikolai and other men in the family handled the intimidating part, if necessary. And they had a whole network of fake documents and schemes to get money in different ways. The police discovered they had fake profiles on dating sites specifically, looking for men with stable jobs in tech, finance, or medicine. The profiles were made to look like pretty immigrant women looking for genuine love. Once they hooked someone, they followed basically the same script they used with me. Move them in to live with the family, gradually isolate them from their friends and family, constantly pressure them about finances, and once they got access to money or property, they'd disappear. If the victim was naive enough to get married before realizing, even better because then they could get more money in the divorce. The case went to court. Tatiana, Valentina, Nikolai, and 2 other family members were arrested and charged with fraud, conspiracy, and a bunch of other charges. Immigration also got involved because some of the women in the operation were in the country on fraudulent visas. I had to testify, which was horrible. Tatiana cried throughout my entire testimony, but I already knew they were fake tears. I had seen her true face. Her lawyer tried to make me look like a vengeful boyfriend, exaggerating a normal domestic dispute, but the evidence was too solid, especially when the other men also testified and the patterns were identical. In the end, Valentina received 8 years in prison and would then be deported. Tatiana received 5 years, also with deportation afterwards. Nikolai received 6 years. The other family members received lesser sentences or were directly deported depending on their level of involvement. I helped the other men recover some of their money through civil lawsuits, although most never recovered everything. I was lucky. I only lost like 3 months of rent from my apartment and a couple thousand in legal expenses, but it could have been much worse. That was like 2 years ago. Since then, I've been extremely careful with relationships. I'm not going to lie. It left me with serious trauma. Now, when I meet someone new, I'm constantly looking for warning signs, analyzing every question they ask. About my job or money, getting paranoid if they mention moving in together too quickly. My friends say I need to go to therapy, and they're probably right. I dated a couple of girls after all that, but it didn't work out because I was too guarded, too distrustful. What I learned from all this is that red flags exist for a reason. When your gut tells you something is wrong, it probably is. I had that feeling in my stomach from the moment I moved in with them, but I ignored it because I was in love, or what I thought was love. Now I know she never loved me. Probably didn't even like me. I was literally just a job for her, a target, and that hurts more than the attempted theft, honestly. Thinking that every moment we shared, every time she said I love you, every plan we made together was a lie. She was acting the whole time, and she did it well. I also learned that it's okay to ask for help. If Emma hadn't helped me translate that conversation, if my parents hadn't flown in immediately to help me, if George the police officer hadn't taken my report seriously, who knows where I'd be now? Probably married, cleaned out financially, and with a restraining order against me while Tatiana disappeared with all my money. These days I'm better, I guess. I work a lot, spend time with friends. I've gone back to my hobbies that I had abandoned when I was with Tatiana. My parents visit me more often now. I think I scared them pretty badly with all this. Sometimes I still think about how I could be so blind, how I didn't see what was happening until I was literally living in the wolves' den. But I also try not to be so hard on myself because they were professionals at this. They had done this many times before. They knew exactly what to say and how to act to make it seem real. My advice for anyone reading this is to trust your instincts. If someone pressures you too quickly about money or legal commitment, if their family is too involved in your finances, if you feel isolated from your support network, if something just feels wrong in your gut, listen to that feeling, and if you can, verify things. I know it sounds super distrustful and cynical, but the reality is that there are bad people out there who see other people as targets, as sources of money, not as human beings. And it's better to be careful than to end up broke and heartbroken.